everyone, and welcome to What You Need to Know About the NINDS Diversity Faculty Development K01 Award, Tips for Preparing Your Application. I am Eduardo Falcón Morales. I'm a Health Program Specialist at NINDS, and I will be your moderator today. If you have any questions after the webinar, please don't hesitate to reach out. There are three of us who work on diversity programs, myself, Dr. Michelle Jones-London, and Dr. Lauren Ulrich, and any of us would be happy to help you out. We also have the Scientific Review Officer who manages the Career Award Study section, Dr. Bill Bensing, with us today to answer your questions. Couple of reminders. You will be muted during the webinar. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box. We will monitor the questions throughout the webinar and address them at the end. If your question wasn't answered, please email us after the webinar so we can help you. First, we will go through introductions. Then we will have a short overview of the K01 mechanism. Next, we will hear from two K01 awardees on how they put their applications together and get tips from a reviewer of these mechanisms. Lastly, we will have a question and answer session. Our speakers today will be Dr. Lauren Ulrich. She is a Health Program Specialist in the Diversity Office at NINDS. Dr. Katrina Robinson is an Assistant Professor at the Medical University of South Carolina with dual appointments in the Department of Neurology and the Department of Neuroscience. Her research program is focused on elucidating the role of metabolic disorders on both normal and pathological brain aging. Dr. Nydia Quillinan is an Assistant Professor at the University of Colorado in the Department of Anesthesiology. Her laboratory work focuses on mechanisms of injury in the cerebellum following global or focal cerebral ischemia and plasticity mechanisms that contribute to recovery in the post-ischemic brain. Dr. Michael Robinson is Professor of Pediatrics and Pharmacology at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, University of Pennsylvania. His work is focused on the regulation of glutamate transport and the role of these transporters in biology and pathophysiology. From 2007 to 2011, he was a regular member of NST1, the NINDS study section that reviews K grants. And so with that, take it away, Lauren.
Hi, thank you for joining us. So I'm just going to give a short introduction to the nuts and bolts of the Diversity Faculty K01 mechanism. So the goal of really all of our diversity programs at NINDS is ultimately to diversify the pool of independent neuroscience research investigators. So the Diversity Faculty K01 does this by providing junior faculty with research funding, protected research time, and professional development mentorship that will give them the security of funding to produce the research results and the papers that will hopefully lead to that research project grant and ultimately tenure. So in terms of eligibility, the K01 has 5 criteria. So the first is that you must be a member of a group that is nationally underrepresented in neuroscience research. And so NIH defines that for this mechanism as groups that have been shown by the National Science Foundation to be underrepresented in health-related sciences, Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino, American Indian or Alaskan Native, or Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders, or individuals with disabilities. And this is defined as those with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And it's important to note that NIH does not determine if you are a member of these groups. If you self-identify as a member of one of these groups, then you work with your institution, and your institution submits with your application a certification letter that tells us that you are a member of one of those groups. So if you have any questions about that, you should feel free to email us, but note that we're not in the business of deciding how you should self-identify. The second criteria is that you must have a doctoral research degree, so PhD, MD, PhD, or an equivalent degree. And you must be in the first 3 years of a faculty tenure-track or equivalent position at the time of the award, and we'll go into what that means a little bit later. And you can't have held a major NIH award like an R01 or P01, P50, those kinds of things. And that's all laid out in the funding opportunity announcement. Number 4, by the time of the award, you must be a citizen or a permanent resident. And then finally, your research project must have NINDS mission relevance. So it's very important that you contact us before you start your application. Because NINDS is the only institute that's signed on to this particular mechanism, so we can only fund research that's within the NINDS mission. And we don't want you to go through the trouble of putting together this big application only to find out that the science is just something that we can't support. So we encourage you, before you even start, to contact either the diversity office or a program officer at NINDS and send us your specific aims or a paragraph about what you're proposing, and we can connect you with the right person to let you know if that falls within the NINDS mission or not. And really, before you apply, if you have any questions, you should contact us. So the K01 Faculty Award, the expectation is that through a sustained period of protected research time and career development, so this award is 3 years, that you'll be able to accelerate your independent research career and become funding for a research project grant. It provides salary up to $95,000 and research costs up to $100,000. And you will really be judged on sort of 5 big categories. So it's the candidate and the career development plan, the research plan, your mentor or co-mentor, and any consultants or collaborators on the grant, and then the environmental and institutional commitment to the candidate. And our shorthand for this in the office is you need the man or the woman, the FAN, which is your mentor, and a plan, which is your research plan, and then a strong institutional commitment. So for the candidate, really you're trying to answer 2 questions. So first, can you justify the need for further career development as a junior faculty investigator? And second, given your prior training and research record, your proposed career development plan, your referee's evaluations, and your proposed research plan, is it reasonable to expect that you will be able to successfully compete for independent research funding within 3 years of the start of the award? So every piece of your application should be working together to answer these questions. Second is the FAN, or your mentor. And the Faculty K01 is a little bit different than other career awards or F awards that you might have applied for, because you're now a junior faculty member, right? And so your mentor, it's really acting as your talent agent, and it should be appropriate to the stage of career. This person is now your peer and should be really helping you navigate the tenure process and the grants process. So institutional expectations, scientific networks, managing a lab, managing a budget, things that you're going to need to succeed at that institution. And they're not your supervisor. They're a mentor. And so it's important that you have somebody at the institution as a mentor or one of a mentoring team, because every institution is going to have its idiosyncratic things about its community or its tenure process, and you want somebody that understands that and can help you navigate that. It's also important that if you have a mentor and a co-mentor or a team of mentors, that they talk about how they will coordinate with each other and then also with you, and talk about what they each bring to you and your career and how that they'll help you. Finally, or actually third, you have the plan. So this is your research plan, and like any other career development award, the reviewers are going to be asking, does the project have scientific merit? So you are going to be using this K award to establish your lab. And so it really needs to have a strong foundation if it's going to support you and support an R01 application. So reviewers really look closely at the plan. Do you have alternative approaches or outcomes? Have you considered what if things go wrong? That sort of stuff. It's also really important that you preserve your intellectual independence from your mentor. So you're a junior faculty member. You should be transitioning to senior author on papers, and the project should be your own. It should not be your mentor's project. And so it helps to make that actually explicit in the application so that reviewers don't have to assume anything. Everything is clearly stated, and they know that you've had this conversation with your mentor and that there won't be any misunderstandings down the road. You also want to make sure that your research is relevant to your career objectives so that these two things make sense when considered, in the whole of where you want to be in 3 years. And like I said, your research plan must fall within the NINDS mission, otherwise we can't fund it. And then we want to see that there is a strong institutional support. So when talking about the institutional commitment, you need to make sure that your institution's tenure track policy is clearly defined. If your institution doesn't have tenure, then you need to talk about what they're offering, what's the startup package, all that, what kind of space are they providing you, all that kind of stuff. The institution needs to provide a detailed description of your position, your responsibility, your duties, the fact that you will have 75% projected time, and they have to show that you are going to be an integrated part of the intellectual community of the institution, and that you're not going to be isolated, but you will be part of a vibrant scientific community. So in terms of common pitfalls, the biggest ones we see are issues about productivity. So if you've had too few first author publications, or you've had not very many publications recently, or if your publications haven't been of high quality or they haven't had a high impact. But it's important to note that if you think any of these apply to you, that doesn't mean that you can't be a good candidate. A big part of this application is figuring out where are your strengths and where are your weaknesses, and then proposing a plan to remediate any weaknesses. Everyone has weaknesses. So the reviewers, what they really want to see is that you're aware of them and that you're taking steps to fix them before you apply for the R01. So let's say you didn't have enough publications out of your postdoc. You can write in your application that you're going to really focus on publications and say, I'm going to publish, 2 papers in the next year and 3 papers the year after that. And as long as you seem to have a good plan, that can be a good way of addressing weaknesses. But don't assume that reviewers won't notice. The other thing is you can emphasize other areas in which you have been productive and have contributed to the scientific community. We also see that reviewers notice flaws in the research plan, especially if there are no clear alternative approaches outlined. If you don't get the results that you expect, what are you going to do? How will you still apply for an R01 in 3 years? So making sure you have a backup plan and that kind of stuff really clearly laid out is very helpful. And then, like I said earlier, you want to make sure that the whole application fits together and provides a coherent picture of who you are, what you've done, and where you want to be. So your career development plan should match with your career goals, with your research plan, and it really should be appropriate to a junior faculty member. And finally, a requirement of this grant is that you have a tenure track or equivalent position. So you need to show that you have this and your institution needs to commit to this before we can give you the award. So everything that I've said is on our website. We have a tip sheet that was put together looking at all of the reviews for both awarded and non-awarded K01s and pulling together what the common reviewer comments were. This webinar, the slides and the video will be posted in a couple of weeks. And be sure that you read the entire funding opportunity announcement and that you pay attention to the application guide and really read the instructions there. And then lastly, I cannot stress this enough, that we are here to help you. And if you have any questions, you should always reach out to either the diversity office or a scientific program directors at NINDS.
Thank you, Lauren. Our next speaker is Dr. Katrina Robinson from MUSC.
Thank you, Eduardo, and I would like to thank the NINDS and Lauren for this opportunity to speak to you on today. So first, starting your application, I know it can be a daunting process, but you really must start by determining what your end is. You have to identify what your research passion is, and your research passion really needs to be different than your mentor's research passion. So for example, my postdoc mentor was focused on diabetic peripheral neuropathy and ALS neurotherapeutics. My goal for my independent research career was to really focus on mechanisms linking metabolic syndrome and dementia, and this turned out to be very crucial in developing preliminary data because my mentor was interested in diabetic peripheral neuropathy, so she used the peripheral nerves, but it gave me the opportunity to generate preliminary data using the brains of similar animal models. So after you determine what your end will be, you really need to think about identifying what your needs are. For myself, I knew that for my graduate studies, I studied the regulation of glutamate receptors, and I had expertise in electrophysiology. In my postdoctoral studies, I studied the cellular mechanisms of aging, where I developed expertise in molecular biology using various techniques. So I knew for this K01 that I needed to develop another set of skills. I needed expertise on the role of metabolic disorders and dementia risk. I needed experience in models of metabolic dysfunction, Alzheimer's disease, insulin signaling, neurophysiology, and animal behavior. So upon identifying these needs, I was then prepared to identify potential mentors. So in identifying mentors, you want to be sure that you have a mentor for every single skill that you are trying to gain. Your primary mentor can actually help you develop a list of potential mentors. And you really need to go and interview these potential mentors. And I want to encourage you not to be afraid to have co-primary mentors. You don't only have to have just one. I actually had 3 for my K01. One of my mentors had provided expertise in models of metabolic dysfunction. One was for Alzheimer's disease, and the other one was for animal behavior and neurophysiology. When you are identifying mentors, you want to make sure that your mentor is approachable, that they actually have a history of successful mentees. Are there mentees in academia? You also want to make sure that your mentors have a history of successful funding. And you want a mentor who's going to be engaged in your ideas and provides feedback. Really beware of someone who just has the attitude of, sure, write the letter, I'll sign it, whatever you need, I'll do it. Because your connection with your mentor, they're going to be connected to you for a long duration of your career, not just during the years of your K01. I still engage in contact with my mentors, even at this stage of my career. So after you've identified all of your mentors, you've identified your needs, you really need to start to prepare your application. And there are tons of resources at your fingertips that you must identify. When you write your specific aims page, you really want to make sure that you have colleagues, mentors, and other faculty members who actually read and provides critical feedback for your specific aims. Also, your university may have programs that are developed through the Office of Research of Development or Faculty Development courses that can also help you with some grant writing. Any type of workshops or books that you can utilize, anything you can use to help your grant application, please take advantage of them. There are also funded R25 mentoring opportunities that are available for each stage of your career. So the resources are out there. Take advantage of them and get as many mentors on your side as you can. So you've done all this, you submitted your application, and you see your score, you log in, and it says not discussed. You go through a whirl of emotions, from being angry to being disappointed to being frustrated, not knowing what to do next. Well, luckily the NIH, they release the scores before you actually get your summary statement, so you have time to process all of your emotions. Once your summary statement comes in, take a step back and read your summary statement. Now, if you're like I am, you take that first read and you have another wild of emotions. Read it a second time after you get over it and really start to formulate a plan for each and every comment that the reviewers list. Formulate a plan for it. Then you should really reach out to your program officer. Your program officer can sometimes provide you advice that maybe you are not seeing with reading your summary statement. So it's very important to talk to your program officer. And this is the importance of identifying good mentors as well, because now you have engaged mentors who are actually willing to sit down with you and help you with this plan that you have formulated. And then you kind of have to make a decision of whether or not you're going to resubmit. And I want to encourage you that just because you see a not discussed does not necessarily equate to do not resubmit. I had actually a faculty member to tell me, I don't want to discourage you, but it is nearly impossible for an application to go from not discussed to funded. And I just want to tell you that that is not necessarily true. My application went from being not discussed to being funded with my resubmission. But the key thing is you really cannot be afraid to let go of some of your previous thoughts. You know, we get so bogged down on I have this great idea and no one else sees it, but sometimes you have to let that go and you have to really look at what the reviewers say and be willing to make changes. So after you've formulated your plan, you're really ready to sit down and evolve, reevaluate, and really edit your application. Again, don't be afraid to change things. From my initial submission to my resubmission, everything was completely different. My specific aims was different. My model was different. My hypothesis was different. I even added additional mentors. So you really want to make sure that you keep talking to your mentors. And sometimes you may even have to renegotiate. So one of the comments from my initial submission was a lack of institutional commitment. So you might have to go to your chair and really renegotiate your package for your institutional commitment. And they want to see that really your institution is committed to you beyond just this K award. If you get this K award, it ends, and you don't have an R01 yet, is your institution still committed? Talk to your program officers again to make sure that, you know, if you make all these changes, are you on the right track to having a good application? And also, again, still take advantage of any resources. My university had a resource where we could submit our resubmissions 6 weeks in advance, and they will find 3 faculty members to actually review the application. So I was able to submit it and actually sit down and watch the faculty members go back and forth with each other on my application. It gave me the opportunity to see where my application was not clear and that I needed to address issues better. So I guess in summary, really start by determining what your end is. You want to identify your needs. You really want to identify your mentors. Prepare your application. Feedback is very, very critical. Let as many people as you can get to read your application, let them read it. Be willing to let things go, and also remember that sometimes you must evolve, reevaluate, and edit. And I know this is probably really corny, but all the beginning letters, if you take all the beginning letters of my title slides, it really spells simple. That's the most important thing, is to keep your application simple. My stance right now with submitting any application is if I cannot draw it, then I need to go back to the board and reevaluate and edit. You should be able to draw your hypothesis out and put it in your specific aims page. Thank you for the opportunity, and I hope something I said was helpful.
Thanks, Katrina. Our next speaker is Dr. Nidia Quillinan.
Thank you for asking me to be a part of today's panel. Today I'm just going to tell you about sort of my process of applying for the K01 application with a little bit more focus on my resubmission process than maybe the initial application. So when I was deciding what mechanism to apply for, I had recently been offered a tenure-track position at the same institution that I completed my postdoctoral training at. And my A0 application was submitted 3 months prior to actually beginning my faculty position. I felt I had a strong application, or I was a strong applicant with a good publication record. I had a track record of obtaining funding during my predoctoral and postdoctoral training. And really, I wanted to, when I was preparing my application, I wanted to focus on kind of a gap-specific plan. So my predoctoral training was in slice electrophysiology, and my postdoctoral training in animal models of brain ischemia. My K01 project was aimed at combining these expertise in the cerebellum and allowing me to develop an independent niche in the ischemia field towards building a strong R application. I had begun developing this project during my postdoctoral training, but did not feel it was really mature enough to submit as an R, and I felt I kind of needed a bridge to the R with some additional training, and so the K01 fit that, what my needs were. So as I mentioned, my A0 was submitted prior to starting my position, so we needed the chair letter of support to really demonstrate a strong commitment to me independent of the success of my K01. It was really important to not have statements like, if this K01 is awarded, the applicant will get, you know, this startup or this space. I wanted to show that my support from my department was independent of the K01 being funded. I chose to have several mentors on my K application. My postdoctoral advisor was my primary mentor. I have the vice chair for research in my department, who is also an ischemia researcher and serves as a career mentor on my award. And I have a faculty from another department in my institution that was included for more technical expertise. I think it's important that the mentor statements are really consistent with your career plan in regard to what their roles are, how they'll be involved in mentoring you, how often you'll meet, and how those interactions with the team will go. The career plan was really focused on both the technical training that I felt I needed as well as the professional development to ensure my success as a new faculty. And I think one of the things that's really important to be mindful of is there's a lot of supporting documentation that's included in this application. So it's really important to make a timeline for when you need documents, particularly from others. So be prepared to draft letters for references. Let your administration have several months' notice that you're intending to apply for this, so you can be sure that your institutional and departmental documents are not left to the last minute, such as that certification letter that Lauren mentioned and your chair letter of support. So I submitted my application, and I was discussed but not funded. So once your application is reviewed, you do find out within a few days of study section whether it was discussed and the impact score if it was discussed. For me, the really hard part was waiting those few weeks to receive the summary statement to know what I could do to address comments. So during that time, I really knew my application was unlikely to be funded, so I focused on resubmission of papers in anticipation of comments regarding productivity during my postdoctoral fellowship. Once the summary statements were available, I sent them to my mentors and discussed with them. You likely can't address every single review or comment, especially in a one-page response, so it's really important to identify what the real score drivers were. And I contacted my program officer, who was really helpful in kind of helping me identify that and prioritizing my responses to critiques. And then when deciding whether to resubmit, I looked at whether I could address these critiques well and whether this was indeed the correct mechanism. I did still feel that this was the best mechanism for my career stage, so I prepared a plan and a timeline for resubmission with my mentors. So reading your summary statement the first few times can be a bit demoralizing. You tend to see the bad more than the good. But it's just important to remember that addressing these comments will really help you submit a stronger, more impactful application. The summary discussion can give some good insight into what the real score drivers were, particularly, again, with some discussion with the program officer. And we also looked for common critiques between reviewers as ones that we thought were kind of more important to address with the resubmission. So for my application, we identified 4 major areas that we felt needed to be addressed before resubmission. Productivity was a concern due to not enough more recent first author applications. During my postdoctoral fellowship, I had a lot of middle author, but not first authors. The perception of independence was a challenge because I was still closely tied with my postdoctoral advisor. We knew we had to overcome these, but we're not entirely successful the first time around. The reviewers were concerned about interpretation of some of the behavioral tasks I'd included in my research plan and asked for more specific tasks for assessing cerebellar function after brain injury, so that was something that we felt was important to address. And finally, my writing style was a bit overly wordy and confusing, and so we needed to find ways to simplify some parts of the grant. For me, a lot of this was resolved by moving toward a more bulleted format and tables, which is especially helpful for the career plan where you can kind of list activities under headings like professional development, technical training, things like that. So when preparing kind of the timeline for resubmission, I decided to skip one cycle to allow for 2 first author publications to actually be in press rather than kind of rushing the resubmission and still getting dinged for productivity. I also made some changes to the mentor team. My primary mentor was changed away from my postdoctoral advisor. And I also added a faculty from another institution that has expertise in cerebellar neurophysiology and behavior to help address some of the research plan critiques that we had. One of the major things that we had to address, again, was the perception of independence. There was concern about the departmental commitment to my independence, which were addressed by obtaining a stronger chair letter to clarify that my space and research support were not dependent on the success of my application, and that they were also, that these resources were not tied to my postdoctoral advisor. This was not necessarily a renegotiation for me, but really just a clarification and a strengthening of that letter of support. My mentors also strengthened their language in the mentor statements to make it clear how they would help me transition to independence. For me, it was really important that they clarify there was no overlap or competition with their research and that they would not continue to be senior author on my publications. And changes to my research plan that we included to address the cerebellar-specific behavioral tasks actually helped with the independence piece as well. Because it really did make the project more unique and defined from what my mentors are doing. I also added a paragraph at the end of my application of the research plan to really clearly lay out how I envisioned this K01 helping me to submit the R01 application in a few years. So my A1 was discussed and received a good impact score. Once summary statements were in, I again contacted my program officers who were optimistic about the application being funded and asked that I write a short rebuttal to address any remaining reviewer concerns. I think, again, there was still some concern about independence, and I think reviewers are used to seeing that you've changed institutions or departments when you're starting a faculty position. So there was still some concern there. And so in my rebuttal statement, I kind of just have copied and pasted what one of my postdoctoral advisor included a statement, just really being clear that my research was unique from him, and that not only would I be moving towards senior author on my publications, but eventually move towards publishing without him on my manuscripts. My application was funded. I'm currently ending my 2nd year of funding and I'm preparing to submit my first R01 application this summer. In summary, I think this is a really great mechanism for someone in the early stages of their faculty position that need just a little bit more technical or professional development to help them get to a strong R01 application. My advice to those submitting is to start your application early so that you can get plenty of feedback on all the different sections. There are a lot of resources available for faculty in the early stages. Katrina mentioned the R25 programs. I did participate in one of those and found it to be really helpful. My institution offered writing workshops and mock study sections that I've now kind of become more engaged with. And it's important that your mentors review your application, but you also want people who are not familiar with your work, because they'll be the ones to really be able to tell you if you've presented your work clearly, maybe even more so than your mentors can. I look at a lot of other grant applications, even if they are for other mechanisms. Every time I read someone else's grant, I find writing or formatting styles that I like and eventually incorporate into my own applications. And I recently got this grant application writer's workbook, and I wish I had it when I was preparing my K application. It's very helpful in how to create a good outline, what content goes into each section, and good formatting templates. So I find it to be a great resource as I'm writing my R01. So I hope this information was helpful to you, and best of luck to those of you who are preparing your own applications.
Thanks, Nydia. Next up is Dr. Michael Robinson.
Hi, everybody. So in today's presentation, I'm going to go through the review process and the criteria that are used to evaluate your application. I'm going to try to give you some tips on preparing your application, and then I'm going to address how you might go about responding to concerns. So you probably all know that your grant will be assigned to a study section. It is my understanding that NINDS is not sure what study section is going to be reviewing these at this time, but it will be your applications will all be reviewed by the same study section. They are generally reviewed by 3 or 4 members of the committee, and all of the members of the committee are expected to provide written comments and scores before the meeting or before they get together into a single room. And this allows one to independently formulate an opinion of the application without being influenced by others. And then the group comes together and they meet for up to 2 days. About 30 to 50% of the grants are not discussed, but they go through. Each reviewer gives their initial score. They talk about strengths and weaknesses. The conversation goes on for pretty close to a half an hour, if not longer. And then ultimately everybody circles back and gives final scores, and the whole committee sometimes participates in the discussion. So the scored criteria will be in the following categories: the candidate, you, the research plan, the career development plan, career goals and objectives, the mentors, co-mentors, consultants, and collaborators, and the environment and institutional commitment. There will be scores for each of these criteria, and the way a reviewer is asked to come up with an overall score is not to average those 5 scores, but to look at the overall and to give different weights based on their opinions of the strengths and weaknesses in each of these categories, and then to give an overall score. Next. So when we're looking at the candidate, we look at the biosketch, and we want to see that you've been consistently productive, hopefully in relatively high-quality journals. We want to see that the letters of recommendation are strong. They talk about your creativity. They talk about your writing abilities, your ability to work with others, your prospects for a future. And then we're also looking at the quality of the application, because if the application is not well written, it's not logically formulated, it doesn't describe a scientific process, then it frankly reflects poorly on your scientific skills. There needs to be a strong research plan. The term that is now used is scientific premise, but really, is there a strong rationale for your work? Is it feasible and likely to be informative? Is the work hypothesis-driven? And by that, there has to be a clear description of experiments that will allow you to accept or refute your hypothesis, and that has to be true for each of your aims. The studies have to be well designed. In many cases, and in most cases, you probably will include statistical analyses or a short description of statistical analyses, including power analyses to clarify that, in fact, you will be able to test your hypotheses. And then it has to be clear that the project will lead to an R01. With the career development plans, the current language that's used by most of these study sections is called gap-based. Where are you now? Where do you want to be, and what do you need to do to get there? Just like you heard earlier, it needs to be content appropriate. For at this stage of your career, you're not likely to be taking 10 additional classes. You're likely to be going to smaller meetings. You're likely to be going to small meetings to help you network. You're likely to be learning some new techniques. 1 or 2 small ones. You're likely to be developing other skills that will facilitate your complete transition to independence. And then it needs to be clear that somebody is on a regular basis monitoring your progress toward your goals. The mentors need to be qualified, experienced, complement the plan, and they need to be logically organized. And each of the mentors should describe specifically their experience with helping other people at your stage of your career. It shouldn't simply state, I've mentored 5 individuals. It might even give their names and their current positions and their current funding status. Within the environment and institutional commitment, there needs to be a clear commitment for protected time, and it isn't, in most cases, sufficient for your chair to say that you will have 75% protected time. It is important for them to also clarify what the specific responsibilities that you're going to have that are beyond research. How much administrative, what kind of committees are you going to be on? Hopefully none. How much teaching will you be doing? And make it clear that they need to make it clear that there is not going to be too much infringing on your ability to develop your research career. And this is a great opportunity for you to get them to put this in writing, because if there's ever an issue as you're progressing, you can just pull out this letter and say, hey, look, this isn't what we agreed upon. There has to be a clear plan for they're fostering your development. There has to be space, equipment, and one of the goals of this program is to diversify our workforce. If you're in an environment where there are lots of individuals from diverse backgrounds, is there going to be a plan for you to be able to serve as a role model in a way that will help to further diversify the workforce? And then there needs to be a clear commitment to your becoming an integral part of the program. So I've been writing grants for quite a long time, print and read the announcements for virtually every grant that I write, not for R01s anymore, but for some of the other unique applications that I write. I print them, I read them, I write notes, all of them, and make sure that I don't miss any of the small things. A reviewer does not like it if you've done a very sloppy job with the responsible conduct of research or have not paid attention to what you need to do with vertebrate animals. If you don't take care of those small issues, that they're quite important issues, then the reviewer sort of feels like you've not spent your time dealing with all of the things that you should be able to easily take care of. You should get copies of successful applications, read them. You should look at the expertise of the review panel, and it'll help you appreciate that you're unlikely to have 3 experts in the area that you're planning to pursue. And that can work to your advantage or to your disadvantage. You're likely to have only 1 reviewer who's going to really have expertise, and you may not even have 1 reviewer. And so you really need to write your application so that every reasonably well-educated scientist will be able to understand your proposal, what the goals are, and why it's novel. I still write my aims 6 months to a year in advance. I do this for a couple of different reasons, including the fact that I like to be able to get preliminary data. We now at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and at Penn strongly encourage everybody who's writing every type of a K to have a complete draft of everything 6 to 8 weeks in advance. They get a few people to read it, and the reason you have to do it this far in advance is because you need to give the person a couple of weeks to read it. They need to know that you're going to have at least a few weeks to address any concerns that they may have raised. If you do it with too little time, if you give me an application to read and the application is going to be due 3 days after I get a chance to read it, then I know that it's really not worth my time encouraging you to make significant changes, and so the feedback won't be helpful. The best applications that I ever reviewed tell the whole story in both the abstract and the specific aims. Most applicants think that the only thing that this application is about the research. This is obviously not an application that's just about research. It's about you and how the research plan is going to facilitate the research plan and the career development plan, and the whole package is going to facilitate your transition to independence. The best of these applications that I reviewed, the highest scoring ones, said the whole story in the abstract and also said the whole story in the specific aims, generally using like a little paragraph at the end of the specific aims to tie it together and indicate how this was going to lead to an R01. Generally, there's a lot of confusion out there about what the significance really is. Significance and background are different. The significance on an R01 from my laboratory is about a half a page, so you're probably not going to use any more than a half a page. And then innovation, I know you like to talk about and think that you're doing the most innovative thing in the world, but the truth is that the innovation can probably be summarized in a few sentences. The way I organize and the way many of the colleagues around me organize the research plan is we have a short summary, we have a rationale, and this is where we give the background and preliminary data that we may have. We have an experimental plan, anticipated results, and then potential problems and alternative strategies. Each one of these is a separate section, and then with the potential problems and alternative strategies, I use several bullets. You know, problem with this drug potentially interacting with other sites. I will use siRNA to complement the pharmacological strategy that I've described, using validated siRNAs and give a reference. That kind of very short, very concise language. As one of the recipients noted, I don't write an application where I can't summarize the specific aims in schematics. My work is particularly conducive to that. This is an example from an R01 that did very well a long time ago, where you can see that all of the three aims, the reviewer can very easily understand that they're complementary but not interdependent. You've got to remember that while you'd love this complete process to be about you, you really want to think about the reviewers as well. Every reviewer has between 10 and 12 applications. Keep every part of your application as simple as you possibly can. If when you're writing a sentence, after you've read it again, you realize that you have 3 thoughts in one sentence, break it down into short declarative sentences and make them flow. We still, when we're writing big center grants or big training grants, leave white space between each paragraph, and no paragraph is more than 5 or 6 or 8 lines. They start with a topic sentence and they end leading into the next paragraph. And you need to use the appropriate font not only in the text but also in the figure legends and in the figures. Remember that your reviewers are likely to be a little bit older than you are. One of the disadvantages of getting older is your eyesight starts to go, and if I have to pull out a magnifying glass to read the X and the Y axis on a graph, I'm not a happy individual. And you generally want to have your reviewers be a happy individual. Why not? And if you see an issue, you need to figure out how to acknowledge it and address it. If there's a gap in productivity during your postdoctoral career or during your graduate career, then you should come up with a way to explain it took us longer to develop this technique, or I had a child, or whatever it was. You don't want to try to hide it because the reviewer will get uncomfortable about it. If, for example, you can't get a letter of recommendation from your thesis advisor, that could be a significant issue, but you need to figure out how to address it and make sure that other senior scientists who knew you during the period of time that you were in your thesis, doing your thesis work, could help you, could provide a letter of recommendation that addresses the issue. Now, I agree with everything you've heard about responding to the review. You go through all of the emotions. It still hurts. I encourage you to print out the review, and then when you finally are calm enough to go through it, I write every comment. I underline or write a note next to everything that was negative, and then I write an introduction that may even be 2 or 3 pages long. I don't worry about the length to start. I just get it all down, and I use 3 or 4 words in italics, and then I use 2 or 3 sentences to indicate how I address the concern. And I don't say I address the concern. I say exactly how I address the concern. We added new preliminary data to demonstrate that this experiment is feasible. Whatever it is, just make sure that you're as specific as you possibly can be. If the reviewers don't see it, it's probably not a great plan to say, if the reviewer had just read my application, they would have recognized that I said this on page 25. Not a great way to start. I would encourage you to, you can write it down if that's the way you feel. You won't have space by the time you write your introduction and you leave white space and you try to address every concern. You'll end up deleting all that kind of text anyways, but it's therapeutic to write it for the short period of time and then just say, on page 25, I have clarified that, and then just indicate what you've clarified. You want to have an ability to read between the lines. Everybody who reviews the case does not like to say that you're a weak candidate or that the research plan is uninspiring. But you're going to want to look at the kinds of adjectives that are used and make sure that you have a pretty good sense for what they're trying to say, and then you need to follow the instructions. It asks you to indicate where you made substantive changes in the proposal, and so I usually put a black line in the left margin and indicate that a black line has been included in the left line and left margin wherever I've made changes to address reviewers' concerns or where I've added new preliminary data. Good luck with your application.
We're going to open it up for questions now. And so we've received several questions. First question, how do I know if I'm competitive for a K01 award? Are there a specific number of publications an applicant should have before applying for a K01? Michael, do you want to tackle that?
Sure. There's a relatively easy trick that you can do. You can go to NIH Reporter. You can search NINDS's website for this particular mechanism. You can download the names of the people who've gotten these applications, and then you do a PubMed search, and you can see how you compare to those who've gotten these applications.
All right, and I'll just jump in and also say that, there really is no magic number. It depends on your field. It depends on the quality of your publications. And so I really think that's a discussion you have with your mentors. And if you think that you don't have enough papers, or if you think that it might be a weakness, then you propose a concrete plan in your career development plan to remedy this. Or you do like Nydia did, and you wait a cycle and really focus on getting those publications out. And then, like I said before, you can also try and highlight other areas of productivity that might help you out.
Okay, thank you both. Another question, is there anything you wish you'd known before you applied? So Katrina and Nydia.
Yes, Katrina. Yeah. Yes. One thing that I wish I had known before applying was I wish I had completely understood the review process. I think now there are resources available online for you to go, and you can actually see the whole process laid out, or if you have the opportunity to participate in any mock study sessions, I think it's really an eye-opener to see how your grants are discussed, and it kind of gives you the ideas to make it more readable and make it more simple for reviewers.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Yeah, I think for me, how long it takes to put together some of the non-research plan parts of this application it was a bit overwhelming my first time around, so just really getting ahead on some of that, especially ones that require you to get some of those documents from others. And I also think just kind of the diverse nature of this study section panel compared to maybe an R01 where your reviewers are a bit more in your field, or even an NRSA panel. I think it's a bit of a broader panel for the K01 reviews. So I think those two for me were kind of things that I wasn't necessarily prepared for the first time around.
Okay, thank you. Another question, how should applicants interpret scores when there is no percentile, and what does it mean when a grant is not discussed? Bill?
Hi, I'm Bill Benzane. Yeah, there's no percentiles on these applications because, as Michael Robinson identified earlier, that these will all go to one study section. And when applications of a certain type are all reviewed within one review panel for each funding round or funding cycle, there's no reason to have to percentile them, because the reason for the percentile applications is to actually, when you have disparate study sections reviewing the same type of mechanism for an institute, such as R01s and all of the various different study sections at CSR, the percentile actually gives you a relative basis to compare the study sections and to compare how they view applications within that, or score applications within that specific study section. And so percentile is really just a way of comparing across study sections. And when they're reviewed all in one study section, there's no need to do that, because you can just go by the raw ranking of the priority scores. And then the reason that applications don't get discussed. The real reason for that is that we get so many applications that we don't really have time to discuss all of them unless we kept reviewers locked up for 3 days, maybe 4 days in some study sections, 3 times a year, which we would never get anybody willing to review. And so the reason that they started put in place and not discussed is to use the time at the study section for the top half of the applications in terms of preliminary score going into the study section. And it's up to the study section members to actually set that, typically which applications should or should not be discussed. You still get the benefit of review of the assigned reviewers. It's just not discussed during the review panel meeting. So that's what the not discussed is. It's just a matter of being able to spend time discussing the top half of the applications that could have a chance of being funded. And I think it was Katrina that said it. Sometimes the line from discuss and not discuss is rather artificial, and sometimes applications are not discussed simply because there's a lot of good applications at specific round, and you just have to look inside and see what the comments are and the individual criterion scores are. And there's a lot of times things go from not discussed, they're just borderline not discussed, and get funded on the resubmission. So you just have to look at the comments and their individual reviewers' rankings and make your own decision, and not let it bother you. You have to leave your ego checked at the door when you start reading your summary statement and see that there's no score. But you might be in a very competitive position, even if you're not discussed.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Another question: how different is this award from the new NINDS postdoctoral K01?
So many of you may not realize, or maybe you do, that NINDS has a new K01 mechanism. So we actually have 2. One is this diversity faculty K01, and one is for postdocs. And so, really, to tell the difference, you need to read the funding opportunity announcement for each. They are for different career stages. They serve different needs. One of the big things is that the role of the mentor is different. So in a postdoctoral K01, that's going to be more of a supervisor role and sort of helping you get to the faculty position. But in the diversity K01, you have the faculty position. This person is going to be your talent agent. You don't necessarily need to have published with them. And so it's good to, have somebody that shares the field of expertise so they can give you advice in your specific field. You have to make sure you're establishing intellectual independence, that you're going to build a whole lab on this, and that kind of stuff. So if you have specific questions about the 2 different mechanisms, definitely reach out to us. But just so you're aware, there are 2 mechanisms, and they are different, even though they're both K01.
Thank you, Lauren. Next question is, what gets reviewers excited about an application? Michael, you want to tackle that?
Science. Cool science. Cool, innovative science. Explaining it in a way that I can understand it even if I'm not an expert in your field.
Great, thank you. How important is external feedback on your proposal? Nydia and/or Katrina.
This is Nydia. I think it's extremely important, and I think, as Michael mentioned earlier, it's really only valuable if you give enough time to actually incorporate the feedback that you are getting from the people reviewing your grant. So I'd say, 6 to 8 weeks before submitting your application, you should be sending it out for kind of that, mock review. And then I did another kind of more last-minute round of review for kind of more grantsmanship polishing a couple weeks before the final deadline.
Can I chime in?
Oh.
This is Mike Robbins. I would like to chime in on that. One of the things to remember is when you're giving your application to some of your colleagues, sometimes they don't want to tell you that your application is got significant weaknesses. So it's important to remind them that they aren't helping you if they don't criticize the application. Tell them you have a thick skin and that you're more than willing to listen to every concern that they have.
And this is Katrina. One thing I will say is that you spend so much time preparing your application and writing, and you are so knowledgeable in the area that you're writing in. You know the literature very well, that often you have blind spots that you really can't see the holes in your application. But having that external person to review your application who may not be as knowledgeable in the literature as you are, they're able to help you connect dots that you miss.
Yeah, and I was just going to chime in and say the same thing as Katrina, and Nydia said it earlier in her first talk. It's really important to give it to someone who is not familiar with what you're doing, because they can fill in the blanks that Katrina was just alluding to. And it's very important to have someone that's not familiar at all and is willing to give you solid feedback, not someone that's just going to say, yeah, it's nice.
Okay, thanks, everyone. One last question as we're running out of time. Are applicants that are at institutions that typically receive R15s rather than R01s still encouraged to apply? Lauren?
So for those of you on the webinar, R15s are for institutions that don't get a substantial amount of NIH funding. They tend to be very teaching intensive. And certainly people at these institutions should definitely apply. You just need to make sure that you're given the resources that are needed to complete the project. So, I mean, it should be an appropriate project, research project, to the institution that you're at. And they need to be able to certify that you will have 75% protected time to work on this project.
Okay. Thanks, Lauren. And so, thanks everyone for listening in. If we didn't get to your questions, please contact us, email us, call us, well, email us first. And thanks everyone. Thanks to everybody.
Good luck.